This is part 2 commentary on the book titled The Bible Unearthed, written by Dr. Neil Asher Silberman and Dr. Israel Finkelstein. And so what we're going to do is go over some of the background of the archaeological information that has been discovered, and then find out some of the conclusions that some of these scholars have. And so let's go ahead and open up the book and see if we can get us some understanding.
More than 200 years of detailed study of the Hebrew text of the Bible and ever more wide-ranging exploration in all the lands between the Nile and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers have enabled us to begin to understand when, why, and how the Bible came to be.
These biblical scholars are saying that it has taken more than 200 years of detailed study, which includes critically examining the text, analyzing the language style and patterns of the text, and then actually going to the places where these biblical events are said to have taken place, right? And then doing archaeological excavations to get a better understanding as to when, why, and how the Bible came to be. And so understand that this is a different type of knowledge than someone who just simply opens up the Bible and they read the stories and then they say, yes, everything in here is 100% truth. Right? Everything happened exactly the way the authors described it and no questions asked. And so these are two completely different approaches to knowledge, right? And it's important for us to be able to clearly distinguish between these two. And so let's find out exactly what these scholars have concluded based on more than 200 years of detailed study.
It is now evident that many events of biblical history did not take place in either the particular era or the manner described. Some of the most famous events in the Bible clearly never happened at all.
One of the most famous events in the Bible that clearly never happened is Noah taking 2 of each kind of animal in the world and then packing them into an ark for 40 days and 40 nights, right? This is super far into the realm of imagination, right? And it's not even worth going back and forth with anyone for a second if someone believes that this event actually literally happened, right? And I don't think that the authors themselves actually believe that this is a literal story, right? And so this story, along with other stories in the Bible, should be taken as a myth. And a myth is used to symbolize a greater meaning, right? And like Manly P. Hall says in his book, How to Read Your Bible, a person has to turn the key 7 times, right, to unpack the underlying meaning of these stories. And a person who interprets these stories as being literal is only turning the key 1 time, right, which only reveals a very elementary level of knowledge, right? And so we may go over some of these more esoteric interpretations in much later series, right? But right now we're focused on analyzing the Bible using textual criticism, historical and archaeological interpretations. And so according to these authors, the current archaeological findings suggest that books such as the Psalms and Lamentations, that these were written around 1000 BCE, possibly, right? While others like the Book of Proverbs date to a much later time, somewhere between the 5th and the 2nd century BCE, right? And this is during the Persian and the Hellenistic period. And then you have books like Joshua and 2nd Kings, which are suggested to have been written through over a span of a few centuries from the 8th to the 5th century BCE. And then you have the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, which is said to have been written in the 7th century BCE, right? Now understand that the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, was written many centuries after the events described in the books were supposed to have taken place. And also what we have to understand is that the Pentateuch was not written by the hand of Moses or by any one person at all, even though tradition may want to have us believe that, right? But it's written by the hands of multiple independent authors, of which biblical scholars have recently discovered.
In other words, scholars gradually came to the conclusion that the first 5 books of the Bible, as we now know them, were the result of a complex editorial process in which the 4 main source documents, J, E, P, and D, were skillfully combined and linked by scribal compilers or redactors whose literary traces, called by some scholars R passages, consisted of transitional sentences and editorial asides. The latest of these redactions took place in the post-exilic period.
And so we have the 4 sources, the J, E, P, and D, who each write their own version of the biblical stories. And then we have these incredibly skillful redactors, or these editors, who had added a few lines in there, here and there. And then they had woven these stories together so good that on the surface, it looks like it's one continuous document, right? One single unified text. And that's how we've been reading it for many centuries, right? And this editing process has taken place more than one time, with the scholars saying that the last time the document has been edited was after the Babylonian exile.
In the last few decades, scholarly opinions about the dates and authorship of these individual sources have varied widely. While some scholars argue that the texts were composed and edited during the existence of the United Monarchy and the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, circa 1000 to 586 BCE, others insist that they were late compositions, collected and edited by priests and scribes during the Babylonian exile and the restoration in the 6th and 5th centuries, or even as late as the Hellenistic period, 4th through 2nd centuries BCE. Yet all agree that the Pentateuch is not a single seamless composition, but a patchwork of different sources, each written under different historical circumstances to express different religious or political viewpoints.
And so while all the scholars don't agree on all the dates and authorship details of the Bible, one thing that many of them do agree on is that this thing has been edited and spliced together using multiple sources, and each of these sources have their own religious or political view, right? And that's why there's so many contradictions in the Bible. Now, the first three sources, the JEMP, they can be recognized in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. But this D source is not found in any of those four books, right? It's only found starting in Deuteronomy, right? And that's for a very special reason. So let's go ahead and find out.
Yet the fifth, the Book of Deuteronomy, was an entirely different case. It bears a distinctive terminology shared by none of the other sources and contains an uncompromising condemnation of worship of other gods, a new view of God as completely transcendent, and the absolute prohibition of the sacrificial worship of the God of Israel in any place but the temple in Jerusalem. Scholars long ago recognized this book's possible connection to the otherwise mysterious Book of the Law, discovered by the high priest Hilkiah in the course of renovations to the temple during the reign of King Josiah in 622 BCE. As narrated in 2 Kings 22:8 to 23:24, this document became the inspiration for a religious reform of unprecedented severity. The impact of the Book of Deuteronomy on the ultimate message of the Hebrew Bible goes far beyond its strict legal codes. The connected historical narrative of the books that follow the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, is so closely related to Deuteronomy linguistically and theologically that it has come to be called by scholars since the middle of the 1940s the Deuteronomistic history. This is the second great literary work on the history of Israel in the Bible. It continues the story of Israel's destiny from the conquest of the Promised Land to the Babylonian exile and expresses the ideology of a new religious movement that arose among the people of Israel at a relatively late date. This work, too, was edited more than once. Some scholars argue that it was compiled during the exile in an attempt to preserve the history, culture, and identity of the vanquished nation after the catastrophe of the destruction of Jerusalem. Other scholars suggest that in the main, the Deuteronomistic history was written in the days of King Josiah to serve his religious ideology and territorial ambitions, and that it was finished and edited a few decades later in exile.
And so when you read in 2 Kings 22 verse 8 through chapter 23 verse 24, it talks about how priest Hilkiah went to the scribe Shaphan saying that he found this book of the law. Right. And then they go and they show it to King Josiah, who then realizes that Israel has been sinning this whole time. Right. And so then he goes throughout all the territory and he tears down the altar, tears down the high places which they had been put up to other gods. And then he kills some of the priests that are involved with these practices. And so what the scholars were doing is they were looking at the book of Deuteronomy and they were seeing how the terminology, its linguistics, and its particular idea of God was so closely related to other books like that of 2 Kings that they concluded that there must be some type of connection here, right? And what many scholars are saying is that this book of the law that Hilkiah found it was not some ancient text that's coming from the time of Moses, right? But rather it was written during the time of King Josiah, and it was basically used as a tool to get people to follow his religious views. And so they wrote it down first, and then they claimed that they discovered it. And the purpose of doing this is to give it more validity, right? And to increase its value when it was read in front of all the rest of the people. And so what this reminds me of is Joseph Smith and what he did with the Book of Mormon, and how he claimed that the angel Moroni showed him the location of these sacred golden plates, right? Of which he then translated into the Book of Mormon. But the reality is that he had just wrote it himself, right? And then he created this marvelous backstory to increase its validity and give it more value. And to a certain degree, it worked. Now, let's continue going, and let's talk about some of the things in the Bible that archaeology has been able to prove, right? And so starting with a person named Minister Edward Robinson, who in the 1800s, he went on 2 expeditions to Palestine to locate biblical sites. And he was successful in locating areas like Gibeon, Bethel, and Shiloh. And then later scholars who came after him, they were able to locate places like Megiddo and Hazar. And then once the Egyptian hieroglyphics were deciphered in the 1800s by Champollion, other investigators found the victory still in 1207 BCE by Pharaoh Meneptah, talking about having a victory over Israel. And what it does is it shows proof that these people actually existed, right? And there has been other external references to Israelite kings such as King Omri, King Ahab, King Jehu, and also the Judahite kings Hezekiah and Manasseh, right? And many others. And what this shows is that the biblical narrative is not just a complete fabrication, right? And that it does have some roots in history.
By far, the most important source of evidence about the historical context of the Bible has come from more than 100 years of modern archaeological excavations in Israel, Jordan, and the neighboring regions. Closely tied to advances in archaeological technique worldwide, biblical archaeology has been able to identify a long sequence of readily datable architectural styles, pottery forms, and other artifacts that enable scholars to date buried city levels and tombs with a fair degree of accuracy. Pioneered by the American scholar William F. Albright in the early 20th century, this branch of archaeology concentrated mostly on the excavation of large city mounds called tells in Arabic, tells in Hebrew, composed of many superimposed city levels, in which the development of society and culture can be traced over millennia. After decades of excavation, researchers have been able to reconstruct the vast archaeological context into which biblical history must be fit. Beginning with the first evidence of agriculture and settled communities in the region at the very end of the Stone Age, archaeologists have gone on to delineate the rise of urban civilization in the Bronze Age, 3500 to 1150 BCE, and its transformations into territorial states in the succeeding period, the Iron Age, 1150 to 586 BCE, when most of the historical events described in the Bible presumably occurred. By the end of the 20th century, archaeology has shown that there were simply too many material correspondences between the finds in Israel and in the entire Near East and the world described in the Bible to suggest that the Bible was late and fanciful priestly literature, written with no historical basis at all. But at the same time, there were too many contradictions between archaeological finds and the biblical narratives to suggest that the Bible provided a precise description of what actually occurred.
So the evidence is clear that there is history written down in the Bible. But the problem is that it's not reliable enough in the way that it depicts certain events, right? And so what we can see is that these scholars are using very elaborate techniques to determine how cities and how cultures were developed. And they're using comparative methods to find out what type of events were occurring at certain places and in certain times. And so until about the 1970s, archaeologists relied heavily on the biblical narrative for their excavations. But as this approach reached its limits, others began to shift their focus on understanding the more human aspects which influenced the writings of this literary masterpiece.
We will see how much of the biblical narrative is a product of the hopes, fears, and ambitions of the kingdom of Judah, culminating in the reign of King Josiah at the end of the 7th century BCE. We will argue that the historical core of the Bible arose from clear political, social, and spiritual conditions and was shaped by the creativity and vision of extraordinary women and men. Much of what is commonly taken for granted as accurate history, the stories of the patriarchs, the Exodus, the conquest of Canaan, and even the saga of the glorious united monarchy of David and Solomon, are, rather, the creative expressions of a powerful religious reform movement that flourished in the kingdom of Judah in the late Iron Age. Although these stories may have been based on certain historical kernels, they primarily reflect the ideology and the worldview of the writers. We will show how the narrative of the Bible was uniquely suited to further the religious reform and territorial ambitions of Judah during the momentous concluding decades of the 7th century BCE.
And so that's what we're going to be discussing as we continue to do more commentary on this series. And so what we can see is that the authors, they interpret the creation of the biblical text as being largely fashioned as a tool for the purpose of reforming Judah's religious culture and furthering its territorial power, right? And so this is the end of part 2 commentary on the book, The Bible Unearthed, written by Dr. Neil Ashel Silberman and Dr. Israel Finkelstein. And so you're going to want to stay tuned for part 3, because this is where we're going to be going into the discussion of the archaeological evidence about the biblical patriarchs. So I want to thank you right now for watching until the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll catch you on part 3.